All right, so go ahead and open up your Bibles to Psalm chapter 10. We are going to be continuing through our study in Daniel together today, but we're going to start in Psalm chapter 10. If you don't have a Bible and you need one, raise your hand. We'll get one to you, or you can also open up your YouVersion Bible app and follow along in the events there. Psalm chapter 10 is where we're going to be starting our time together today. I don't know about you, but for me, when I was a kid, I hated reading. Reading of any kind was just terrible to me. I didn't want to do any of it. I mean, today now I like reading. I enjoy reading, but it's always on either theology or leadership or something practical like that. I can't read fiction. It drives me absolutely crazy to read fiction, and so I can't do it. And I don't know how you are. Maybe you enjoy that or whatever. That's cool. I remember when as kids they would take us to the library and they would say, "Hey, pick a book, any kind of book that you want." And I just thought it was torture the whole time. I'm like, I don't want any of these. What do you mean pick any book I want? I want none. And so I'm just trying to figure out how that's all going to go. And so eventually I came across the idea of choose your own adventure books. I don't know have any of you read those? You like those ones? I came across those. They sort of grabbed my attention and I was able to kind of bear with them a little bit more. But then I figured out that if you read the end, then you can sort of pick the route that you want to go and try to get to the end that you desire. And so I was kind of cheated that way and try to do that in order to figure out how to bring about the desired end. Well, in the Bible, God actually does that many times. He tells us the end as we're going through over and over again so that we can know where everything is headed, and that it's something how God actually does pretty often throughout Scripture. And this does two things for us. For those who have not submitted their lives to Jesus in faith, it sobers them to reality. That if you haven't given your life to the Lord, if you haven't submitted to Him in salvation, then your mind becomes sobered to the reality that I am going to stand before God one day and give an account for my life. And that simple fact, that reality sets you in a different frame of mind, a different place for your attention is given to that. But also, not only pointing to the idea of accountability to God, but for those who are in Christ, it also, or those who are in the family of faith, or those who have placed their lives into Jesus' capable hands, it brings about confidence and comfort and a renewed commitment to Jesus. That I realize that no matter how things are looking from my perspective here on earth, in the end, Jesus wins. And so it just gives you a different perspective on life. It gives you a different kind of a confidence in life. And so as we think about that, I wanted to read Psalm chapter 10, part of that with you this morning, because I think it sets up that idea really well for us as we go into Daniel together. So let's read Psalm chapter 10. We're going to look at the first 7 verses and then skip ahead to verse 14 and read another piece there. So it says this, Psalm 10:1 says, why do you stand afar off, O Lord? Why do you hide in times of trouble? Have you ever felt like that before? Something's happening in life, something is difficult, something is just really weighing on you. It seems like that there is trouble all around and God is distant or indifferent. And you just wonder, what is happening? God, don't you know? Don't you care? I think it's great to see that not only does the psalmist write about that, but that's a common thing that we all can identify with and feel and understand. Well, let's keep going and see what he has to say. It says, verse 2, the wicked in his pride persecutes the poor. Let them be caught in the plots which they have devised. For the wicked boasts of his heart's desire. He blesses the greedy and renounces the Lord. The wicked is proud and in his proud countenance does not seek God. God is in none of his thoughts. His ways are always prospering. Your judgments are far above, out of his sight. As for all his enemies, he sneers at them. And he has said in his heart, I shall not be moved. I shall never be in adversity. His mouth is full of cursing and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue is trouble and iniquity. And you see this backdrop being painted here as we look at these first 7 verses, and it continues on with more of the same through verse 13, just that it is just not good, that there's this terrible and tragedy and people who are just pridefully arrogant against God. And it seems like even though they're against God, they're just prospering, and it seems unjust. It seems like it's an injustice that they would prosper. And here I am, Lord, I'm trying to serve you, and things are hard for me, but these people don't care about you at all. In fact, they blaspheme you, and things are going really well for them. That's just mind-blowing to me. And the psalmist is expressing this heart's desire and this frustration, and it seems like you're just far away, God, and you just don't care. But then look at verse 14. Notice what it says there. But you have seen. Do you see that? You have seen. Even though it seems like God doesn't know, even though it seems like God is disconnected, he sees. For you observe trouble and grief to repay it by your hand. The helpless commits himself to you. You are the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and the evil man. Seek out his wickedness until you find none. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations have perished out of his land. Lord, you have heard the desire of the humble. You will prepare their heart. You will cause your ear to hear, to do justice to the fatherless and the oppressed, that the man of the earth may oppress no more. And here as we see that this section in verses 14 through 18 shifts the entire tide from God is distant and far off and he doesn't even know, nor does he care, to no, the truth is God sees. The truth is God knows. And that even though from my perspective it seems like things aren't going the way that I think that they should, God is still on his throne and he is in control and his kingdom is established as an everlasting kingdom. You see, there are times when it seems like God is disconnected and different, but the truth is that he does see and he will bring justice. And that's the thought behind Psalm 10. And it's also the thought behind Daniel chapter 7, which is where we're going to be spending our time together today. So if you go ahead and make your way to Daniel chapter 7, that's where we're going to be looking at together today. And here's our big idea as we look at Daniel 7. It's this, that Jesus is king and his kingdom will literally and physically be realized. That he's king. Jesus is the king and his kingdom is going to be literally and physically realized. And so what we're going to do is look at Daniel chapter 7 in two parts. We're going to do it section by section because it's the full chapter and it's a bit of a longer chapter, so it'll help us to be able to get through it, and reading it all together just would take some time and we would get lost along the way. So we're going to take it in parts, but here's the two main parts that we're going to be looking at. Verses 1 through 14, Daniel's dream and visions, and then verses 15 through 28, God's message to humanity. So there's our two parts we're going to look at today. Now today, it's going to feel a little different. Not just because we're doing two services, but it's going to feel a little bit different because there's a major shift happening in the book of Daniel. That up until now, the first 6 chapters, and maybe you will remember this when we did our first study, you think back to our first study in Daniel, we talked about how the book of Daniel divides really neatly in half. The first 6 chapters deal specifically with the idea of Daniel the focus is on stories about Daniel. And then here in chapter 7 through 12, the focus shifts to being the visions of Daniel. Or you could think of it like this. The first 6 chapters are the past, and the next 6 chapters are the future. And so that's where we're shifting here together today in our thought process. So it's going to feel very different. It's shifting a lot from a narrative that we saw in the first 6 chapters to now we're going to be focusing a lot on prophecy. So if it feels different today, that's why. It's a very different kind of a focus. So let's look at our first section together, Daniel's dream and visions, verses 1 through 14. Look at verse 1 with me if you would. It says this, in the first year of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. Here in verse 1, what we see is that Daniel recognizes that he's having a dream, right? He's there, he's having a dream, and you'll notice there we're given some context as to when this dream took place. It says there in the first year of Belshazzar. So we're sort of taking a step backward in time from where we've been in our study through Daniel. Belshazzar is a familiar name to us because we saw that he was king in chapter 5. And so Daniel is saying in the first year of Belshazzar, which puts us sometime between the end of chapter 4 and the beginning of chapter 5 chronologically. Daniel's an older man. He is serving in the Babylonian Empire, and this is before the events of chapter 5 take place, and chapter 6 is where the Medo-Persian Empire takes over after that. And so Daniel here, as he's living in this, it says that he has a dream. He has some visions in his head that night. He recognizes here that the dream is significant and not just the random product of a late night snack, right? He says, I got to write this down. Something's taking place. And so I had this vision. It was vivid. It was clear. There were some amazing details. And when he wakes up, he realizes, I got to write this down. This has significance. This has importance. And so he does. He takes some time to write it down and to capture it. Now, something I think is interesting about this is that what we don't read is that Daniel is doing anything to try to get this vision. Did you notice that? He's just living his normal life. In fact, he's literally sleeping when God does this. There's no mention before that he's petitioning God for this, that he's asking God for it, that he's even thinking about it, that he's just living his normal life. And in living his normal life, God intervenes, God interrupts. God decides to let Daniel know some details about what's going to happen in human history. Why does God do this? I think about that. Why in the world does God do this? And we don't see that it happens all the time, but God does from time to time. He does this. Well, the reason is because he wants us to know, he wants Daniel to know, and he wants us to know he's in charge. You see, some crazy things are about to take place. This kingdom that Daniel lives in is about to be overthrown by the Medes and the Persians. A lot of shifting is going to take place here. And God wants Daniel to know this isn't random happenstance. This is me moving, Daniel. This is me doing something. This is me being in control. Even though you can look at the situation you find yourself in, you can look at all of the details and how they seem like they're in turmoil and in chaos. Don't put your hope in that situation or in that stuff. Put your hope in me, Daniel, is what he's being called to. And so too it is with us, that we're being called to trust in and hope in the Lord. The question that I think about, and I want to ask you, and I ask myself as I read through this, is this. Is your normal life positioned so that if God did speak to you, you would actually hear it? That here Daniel's going through the motions of his normal life, and his normal life is set to the glory and honor of God. And because it is, there's not this hindrance to God here, to God's voice. It's not like there's this sin that Daniel's harboring in his heart. There's not this waywardness in his spirit. There's not this attention directed away from the things of the Lord, but he's so in tune with the things of God that God speaks and he hears and he recognizes this is the Lord. This is significant. I should write this down. I should pay attention to what's taking place. And I just want to ask you, what about you? What about your life? What about what you're doing? Is your life positioned so that if God did speak, you would actually hear it? Are you positioned under the grace of God in such a way? And my fear is for myself and for us as a church that we would somehow drift from that we would get to the point that somehow, somewhere, that God would be speaking and that we would just not hear what he's saying because we'd be so busy about our thing. We'd be so distracted by the things of the world. We'd be so consumed by all the stuff that's constantly grabbing for our attention, and we just wouldn't hear God's voice. Because here's the truth. God is speaking. He's speaking all the time. And the fact that we don't hear it has nothing to do with him. It has everything to do with us. And if we would position ourselves well, if we would position ourselves correctly under the grace of God, then we would hear what God has to say and we'd be able to follow him. Verse 2. In verse 3, we see that Daniel starts to tell us about his vision. Notice there in verse 2 what it says. It says that in my vision by night, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring the great sea. And so I think as I look at this, I think about maybe Daniel standing on the shore. It doesn't really tell us exactly, but that's kind of the way it plays out in my mind. And he's looking out over the great sea, which for Daniel would be the Mediterranean. All right, so when we're thinking about the Great Sea, he's looking out over the Mediterranean, and it's just being stirred up by the wind. It's very tempestuous. There's a lot of turmoil. The waves are being tossed around all over the place. And from that, we read in verse 3, 4 great beasts come up from the sea, each different from the other. So there's this backdrop that's being given to us. There's this vision that's being given to us. And like is common in the biblical writing, the way that the Hebrew people would write, typically their genre, the way they would write things is they would tell you the whole story first, and then they would go back and fill in some details. That's exactly the way that Daniel's vision is written. That he tells us the whole dream. There was the sea, there was 4 beasts. That's the whole dream. And then he goes back and says, here's the details that are associated with all of these different kinds of things. And at first, Daniel doesn't make the connection, but we'll see that this is actually connected to something else. Look at verse 4 with me, if you would. It says this. The first, so we're talking about the beasts, the first was like a lion, and it had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth and between its teeth, and they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird, and the beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, verse 7, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth, and it was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up from among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots, and there, sorry, I lost my place here. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and the mouth speaking pompous words. See, Daniel has this vision. He starts to describe these 4 beasts, and it's really kind of a crazy dream if you think about it. If you had this dream, you'd probably be pretty freaked out by this. I mean, there's all these beasts, and they're coming out of the sea, and it's all these crazy details, and some of it is really graphic. Like there's these horns that are being yanked out by their roots. Like that's kind of crazy to think about, and pretty graphic concept there. And at first, Daniel doesn't make the connection, but we'll see in verse 17, we'll get to that a little bit later, that this is actually representative of the kings of the earth. And that this is running concurrent with, this is a parallel to the vision that Nebuchadnezzar had in chapter 2. And so as Daniel's having this vision, this dream, it's the same exact vision and dream, just from a different perspective that Nebuchadnezzar had. And certain details are given to us about each beast, identifying them precisely and clearly and specifically. And we have the benefit of human history to look back and to say, yep, that's exactly what took place. And so we see clearly how Daniel says these things. Now, here's what's amazing about this. At this time, as Daniel is seeing this, the Medo-Persian Empire is sort of rising to power, but they're not really a huge threat to Babylon. So there's not really a thing that they're worried about or afraid of. Yeah, there's some skirmishes, but they're not a huge threat. As you look further down the road, the Greeks, there's no real threat from them. And Rome was a tiny village town by a river somewhere. It was like in Rome you had the Romans, you had the Athenians and the Spartans, and they were fighting each other. And they were just trying to decide who was tougher. And so it's like there's no way that Daniel could look down through human history and see all of this, but he does. And so let's look at all of these and clearly see how this plays out. You see, the first is a combination of a lion and an eagle. See that there in verse 4? The first was like a lion, and it had eagle's wings, and I watched till its wings were plucked off. And so we see these 2 concepts of a lion and an eagle, and both of these are the pinnacle of their specific kind, right? So for the animal kingdom, you have the lion who is the king of beasts and who is the most regal and glorious of the animals. And then you also have the eagle, which in terms of the birds is the most glorious and regal of all of the birds. And so you take these two and you see that these were also used a lot in Babylonian culture, in their paintings and in their symbolism. And these represent Babylon. Looking back to chapter 2, we see how it connects with the statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw and the head of gold in verses 37 and 38, that they represent the pinnacle of their kind, glorious and majestic. The second one we see there, also notice you see there, it says, I watched how its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Doesn't that sound a lot like what happened to Nebuchadnezzar? That his wings were plucked off, his glory was taken away, and then he was lifted up to stand like a man. That he acted like a beast and then became like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And so there's this description of even Nebuchadnezzar there in that. Verse 5, the second one, and suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear, and was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. So you have this lopsided bear, well, it's got some ribs. I'm like, I like barbecue too. I think that's pretty awesome. Way to go, bear. That's not really what it's talking about. All right, so you got this lopsided bear. What is that all talking about? Well, the reason that the bear is lopsided or it's bigger on one side is because after the Babylonians came the Medo-Persian Empire, the Medes and the Persians. And even though it was 2 different kingdoms together to form one empire, one of them was stronger. One of them was bigger, and it was the Persians. The Persians were stronger than the Medes, and so they were able to get the Medes to fight alongside them, but they retained some of their autonomy, but the Persians were stronger, and so that's why you have the bear that's bigger on one side. Also, it has 3 ribs in its mouth, which represent 3 different major battles or victories where they conquered. One of them was the Babylonians. One of them is the Egyptians. I can't remember what the third one is, but you can look that up in history if you want to figure that out. So there's the ribs. Also, notice we're given one more detail at the end there. It says, arise and devour much flesh. The Persians were known to be an extremely brutal people. Very brutal, very torturous, very crazy in what they did. The Persians are the ones who invented the idea of crucifixion. The Romans are the ones who perfected it, but the Persians invented it. And so the whole idea of crucifixion was, how do I torturously kill you as slow as possible? That's the whole mentality of crucifixion. That's the Persians. That's who they are. And so they're very brutal, very bloodthirsty kind of a people. And you can see their connection to the chest and arms of silver in Daniel chapter 2, verse 39. Thirdly, verse 6, we see that we have a 4-headed, 4-winged leopard. Do you see that there? Now, the idea of a leopard is that they're very fast, and they pounce on and take over their prey very quickly. Now, if you give a leopard wings, they go even faster. It's like Red Bull, right? It gives you wings. And so it's like a leopard on Red Bull. And so they go real quick and they're taking over everything. Now, what happened here is the Grecian Empire is represented by this leopard. And what they did in human history, we can look back and see, they took over everything really, really fast. In fact, Alexander the Great, the head of the Grecian Empire, he before he was 30 years old, had conquered the known world. And he actually wept because there was nobody left to conquer. Oh man, there's nobody left to kill. I'm so sad. Like, what a crazy kind of a guy, right? And he ends up dying prematurely, and he doesn't have any children to leave his empire to. And so the way that it works out is that it goes to his 4 generals, the 4 heads of the leopard. The 4 generals end up taking over his empire. And then we see in verse 7, and that's also seen in Daniel chapter 2, verse 39 as the bronze. Then verse 7, the 4th one is sort of indescribable as an animal. Look at it there in verse 7. It says, and after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. And maybe you can remember back to chapter 2 and the description of that next piece of the statue. It was the legs of iron. So there's a direct correlation there to the idea of the iron teeth. And this is speaking of the Roman Empire who would come after. Very strong, very powerful, an unstoppable force, very big, and crushes everything. And that's in chapter 2, verse 40, where you see that. Now, at this point, we have a departure here from history to now prophecy. This is where it all shifts in the vision, because we look back and we can see clearly how human history points to these things and the precision with which it all is all explained. And then from here, there's no longer any more precision. It's not something where we can look back and say that exactly took place in human history. So now it's pointing ahead to future. Notice there that it says at the end of verse 7, it says it was different from all the beasts that were before it. And here's the difference. It had 10 horns. So there's something different about this beast. There's something else that's taking place with this beast. Verse 8, I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up from among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. And so as we look at this, we see that looking back at the clarity and precision and accuracy with which we can see how distinctly all of these other empires were described and prophesied about, and it happened exactly the way that it should. What that does is it gives us confidence that the parts that are yet unfulfilled are absolutely going to take place. That when we look back and see how prophecy is absolutely fulfilled and completely secure and sure, we can see how the parts that point ahead are just as sure, just as secure, though they haven't happened yet. You see, sometimes people think, well, I see that your Bible talks about Jesus and Jesus is coming back one day, and that's a cute idea, but I don't see that happened. That's not going to really happen. Or they say things like, well, if God was real, then I would speak this blasphemous thing, and then God would strike me. And then they say something crazy, and then God doesn't do anything, and they go, yeah, I proved it. God isn't real. And that's just ridiculous, because that's not who God is. They're trying to box God into this thing and say, prove yourself to me, but that's not who God is. You see, the way that God describes himself is in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 9, directly connected to this idea. It says this, the Lord isn't really being slow about his promise, as some people think. No, he's being patient for your sake. He doesn't want anyone to be destroyed, but wants everyone to repent. It's not that God is slowing down, or not that God's just disconnected or disinterested or has vacated the throne some way. It's that God is absolutely in control, but he's being patient with even your blasphemous mentality because he wants you to be his own. That's why. He wants everyone to come into his family. And so we're told here in this fourth beast that it's unique. And part of the uniqueness of this fourth beast, of the Roman Empire, is that it was never conquered. It lasted for a long, long time, and then it sort of just unraveled from the inside out. The immorality within the Roman culture just tore it apart from the inside out. Nobody came along. There wasn't another empire that came along and destroyed Rome and took over. It just unraveled. And so that makes it very, very unique. Another thing that makes Rome unique is the strength of Rome, in that it, when they took over other cultures, one of the things that they did was they didn't try to impose their culture on those people. Instead, they absorbed that culture into their own. And so that partially made them very, very strong. They would mix it up so that they would maintain control, but they didn't try to impose their culture like the previous kingdoms before. They absorbed those cultures into their own and kind of became this big melting pot of different thoughts and ideas. Now in this, we see that there are 10 horns that rise up and come from the fourth beast. And this is directly related to the 10 toes in Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2. If you remember back in verses 41 through 43, that there was these parts of the statue, and you had the head of gold, the chest of silver, the belly of bronze, the legs of iron, and then it was iron and clay that made up the feet, and there were 10 toes described. And what this shows us is that this fifth part is made up of something similar to the fourth one, and it has these differences as well. So it's sort of connected but disconnected. And so what this is showing us is that there is yet to come a revived Roman Empire, and from this revived Roman Empire, there will be 10 heads instead of just one. There will be 10 kings that lead instead of just one. And that this is where the 10 horns are at, and this is also where the 10 toes of iron and clay show us that what's going to happen. So even though there's 4 beasts described here, there's really a fifth one, if you want to say that, in the horns themselves, as they're unique, or they're connected to one another and yet separate from one another. You see, Then we see not only does this happen, but there's a little horn that comes in the middle. So if you think about, there's this beast, he's kind of crazy looking, he's got 10 horns, and then you kind of zoom in on just the horns. And then there's, in the middle of these 10 horns, there's a little one kind of coming up. And it seems unassuming, and then all of a sudden it rips out 3 of them by the roots. That's pretty crazy, right? And then it grows in prominence. We'll read a little bit further in the chapter. That one grows in prominence. And it's described with human features. It has eyes and a mouth and speaks pompous things, it says here, which are blasphemous kinds of words. What this is known as, and I sort of hesitate to say this word, because once I say this word, you're going to get a weird thought in your head and a weird vision in your head. And you're going to think of someone that's like sinister and evil and probably has red eyes and 666 written across their forehead. Don't think that, okay? The word is Antichrist. That's who this little horn is. And so instead of thinking someone who's obviously evil and terrible, think of someone who everybody loves, everybody accepts, and everyone thinks they're awesome. That's the little horn. It comes up unassuming at first, and yet takes over in dramatic fashion. And that's what's taking place here. Turn in your Bibles with me, if you would, to Revelation chapter 13. I want to show you some of this. Now that we have this description that we've read in Daniel, I want to show you Revelation chapter 13 and the connection to Daniel 7 here. And I think that as we just read through it, you're going to clearly see some really amazing things here. Look at verse 1 of Revelation chapter 13. It says this: "Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea." Does that sound familiar? Seems like we just read that, right? We just read that in Daniel. "Having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on its horns are 10 crowns, and on its heads a blasphemous name. Now, the beast which I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like the feet of a bear, and its mouth like the mouth of a lion." Interesting, the kind of animals that are selected, isn't it? Same exact thing as we saw in Daniel. "The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?' And he was given a mouth speaking great and blasphemous, great things and blasphemies. And he was given authority to continue for 42 months. 42 months, just so that you know, if you do the math on that, it's 3.5 years, which is significant. We'll get to that more in Daniel chapter 7. There's some more details of this that are significant to Daniel 7 as well. It says, "Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life, the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear." And so we see here that this little horn is able to do some crazy things here and given great authority. Take that and let's go back to Daniel chapter 7 and continue on with this. So here's that little horn. Verse 9 says this: "I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain, its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, and yet their lives prolonged for a season and a time. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming on the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days and brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed." You see, there's a shift here, a scene shift here, where the authority and eternality and focus of God and holiness of God is focused upon. That the scene abruptly shifts from the crazy beasts and the creatures to all of a sudden the throne room of God. It shifts from this crazy scene of these scary things to where now all of humanity is standing before God to be judged. And this refers back to Daniel chapter 2, verses 44 through 45. If you remember in in Nebuchadnezzar's vision, that there's this statue, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere, there's this rock that comes out of heaven and destroys the statue, and a mountain grows up in its place. This is exactly the same kind of a thing, that out of nowhere, the scene shifts. We're talking about all these beasts, and then all of a sudden it shifts to God. And we see that in verses 9 and 10 that God is focused upon, and there's some specific things. Notice that we see in these verses the authority of God, the eternality of God, the holiness of God, the consuming purity of God in the fire, and all of these things are a backdrop to his presiding over the judgment of humanity. That God gets to judge humanity, and that everybody's going to stand there. Notice what it says there at the end of verse 10. It says 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. That's like saying a lot. Everybody is going to be there. Everybody stands before God. And this speaks to us of the fact that we all have an account to reconcile with the Lord. Revelation chapter 20, verses 11 through 15 says it like this. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it, from whose face the whole earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works, and by the things which were written in the books. The sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades delivered up the dead who were in them. And they were judged, each one according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. It's this scene that we see here in Revelation chapter 20 is the same idea of what we see happening here in Daniel chapter 7, that there's this judgment that's being pronounced, and everybody is standing before the judgment seat of God, and he is judging the world, and that everyone is standing there before God based upon their lives. And what's interesting about this is that there is absolutely nobody who escapes this. There isn't anybody too powerful, so strong, so glorious, so wealthy, so connected that they get out of judgment. That flies in the face of our culture, doesn't it? There are so many people that just because of their position, their popularity, their money, their power, their connections, it's like they have a different set of rules for them than everybody else does. They do all this crazy nonsense and they just get off. But God says, nope, that's not how it works with me. It's also the opposite end of the spectrum. It's not that there's people that are so unknown and so obscure and so little known that they somehow fly under the radar and they get through without being judged as well. No, everybody, from the greatest to the least, everybody stands before God. Everything is being recorded. Everything's being written down in these books. And then we see not only does the attention shift from the beast to the throne room of God, but then verse 11, it shifts back again. See that there? Shifts right back to the little horn. And in verses 11 and 12, that the little horn is being judged and that this destruction is happening through a burning flame of fire. Revelation chapter 20, verse 10. And then we see, as we look at verses 13 and 14, it shifts again. See how this is going back and forth? There's a lot of rapid succession, and it's changing from here to there, and it's almost like it's cutscenes from this to that, and like the time frame is really muddy and unclear. Are these things happening at the same time? Are they happening separate from one another? What exactly is the timeline? There's a lot of this that is just written in such a way that we're not given certain clarity on all of it. And we've got to be able to look not only back at the past, but also ahead to the future in Revelation to see what's taking place in order to put it all together. You see, the attention shifts here in verses 13 through 14 back to Jesus. Notice it says this, I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. That there's somebody like the Son of Man. Now, the Son of Man, this is a title that Jesus, it was his favorite title to give to himself. It's one that he constantly was speaking of himself about, was the Son of Man. And what that didn't mean is, I've got human parents. Like it wasn't the way that you would say, yep, I'm the Son of a Man as well. Nope, that's not what he's talking about. That when Jesus says Son of Man, it's in reference to, it's in connection to being the Messiah. That's the point of the Son of Man. And so when it says that, it's talking about the promised one, the hope of Israel, the hope of humanity that would save everybody. And so Jesus, we're shown here in verse 14, he establishes his eternal kingdom among men. And we see that take place in Revelation chapter 21, verses 1 through 7. So there's this connection between what's taking place in Daniel and this direct connection to what's happening in the book of Revelation. So we see that not only is Daniel's dream and vision what we see in verses 1 through 14, but secondly, we see that in verses 15 through 28, God has a message to humanity. It's not just a random dream. It's not just that he ate some pizza too late at night and had a crazy dream, that God's actually communicating something through this dream. That God wants something to be understood, something to be grasped. He has something to say to us. And so that's what we're going to look at in this second piece. Verse 15, it says this, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts, which are four kings, which arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. And so Daniel here, he's really freaked out by this whole scene. And I think if I was in that situation, I would feel the same way. This is a pretty psychotic kind of a dream. And I don't know what is going on, but it's disturbing. And so he's not sure what to do with it. And it's a lot to process. But he knows it's significant. But even though he knows it's significant, he doesn't know what to do with it. So he looks and there's somebody standing near him. Now, we don't know who it is. Is it an angel? Is it just a person? Is it the Lord? We're not told, but somebody's there and he decides to go over and say, hey, do you know what's taking place with this? Can you tell me what's happening with all this stuff? And so he asks him, but notice there that as he receives this information, there's no hesitation from Daniel whatsoever about what he receives. That he doesn't question it, he's not uncertain about it, that there's just something about what he's being told that rings true within him, and he knows I should just receive this. He knows I should just take this in. He knows this is right and true and appropriate, and so he decides to take it in, that he knew instinctively that it was the truth. It reminds me of what it says in Romans chapter 8, verse 16. It says this, the Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. That there's this thing that takes place that God's Spirit bears with or bears witness to or helps you to understand or just intuitively get certain things. And that's part of the ministry that God has with us. That he wants you to know that you can trust him. And so there's just that certain part of it where you just know this is true. You know this is right. You know I should trust this. You know I should believe this. You know I should go into the things of the Lord this way. And I believe it's why many of you are even here today, is because you just know that God is speaking to you. You know that God's word is true and you want to hold to his word. There's this intuitive affirmation that something is from God. It just seems to click and fit correctly. So verse 17 and 18, we see the interpretation of Daniel's entire dream. So we have a whole bunch of verses about the dream, and then we're given 2 verses about the entire interpretation. Isn't that just like God? How funny is that? That's what God does. And basically, the interpretation is there's going to be lots of kings, but God wins. That's the basic interpretation. Like Jesus wins. That's really what it all comes down to. And this brief interpretation encapsulates all of human history, that essentially men were going to get their shot at ruling, but in the end, God wins. Now, what we see here is that in this, not only is it a parallel of Daniel chapter 2, but it's also a contrast to Daniel chapter 2. In Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar's vision of human history and all these kings is this glorious, majestic, awe-inspiring statue. And as Nebuchadnezzar looks at it, he thinks, that's amazing. And then out of nowhere, a rock destroys it and he feels terrible about it. On the other hand, when you look at Daniel and his vision and his dream, you see these terrible, disgusting, crazy-looking beasts. And then God kills them and takes over. And it's like, oh, thank you, Lord, that you did something about it. You see, not only is it a parallel in terms of the same vision, but it's also a contrast in that it has two perspectives. From man's perspective, we think, man, if I just had power, if I just had authority, if my group just had their shot, then everything would be taken care of. All the problems of the world, they would all be resolved. I've figured it out. I've got the thing that we got to do. It's just this, if we shift politically just a little bit like this, everything will work. It'll all just happen. And that's what we're sold every single time there's an election. I've figured it out, everybody. Just elect me and I'll fix everything. And you know what happens? It gets broken worse every time. Like, yeah, some stuff gets fixed here, some other stuff gets broken there. And the reason is because our hope can't be in man. Our hope can't be in humanity. Our hope can't be in a political process or system. Now, that doesn't mean we don't participate. It doesn't mean that we don't engage in that political process. And in America, we have one of the greatest privileges in all of human history to actually vote for things. But it does mean that we don't put our hope in that. Our hope's in Jesus, in Him alone. Because when God looks at it, He doesn't see a glorious statue. He sees beasts that consume and kill people. That's what He sees. He sees people that take authority and power too far, and they're willing to take people over instead of serve them with what they've been given. And so this explanation partially makes sense to Daniel, but he just can't get the details of the fourth beast to line up in an understandable way. And so he goes back to it. Look at verse 19. He says, "Then I wish to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron, its nails of bronze, which devoured and broke in pieces and trampled the residue with its feet, and the 10 horns which were on its head, and the other horn which came up before, with which 3 fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth and spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints." Remember we read that in Revelation? "And prevailing against them until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was made in favor of the saints and the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom." And so Daniel is still just not sure. He sort of gets it, but there's this part of it, there's this detail that's just sticking in his head, and it has to do with the fourth beast and these horns, and how does this all fit together, and what's going on? And it's understandably so, that it's muddy and confusing. Until you look from our vantage point at human history and head to Revelation, then you can see clearly what's going on. You see very simply what's taking place. And so Daniel, not only is he worried about it, but then he's given the specific interpretation in verses 23 through 28. So let's read that. It says this, "Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms." Okay, we got that. That makes sense. That's tracking. "And he shall devour the whole earth and trample and break it in pieces." Look at verse 24. "Then the 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom," a revived Roman Empire, right? The 10 kings. "And another shall arise after them." This is the Antichrist. Notice the pronoun changes. "He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. But the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and dominion and greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him." And so here the whole thing shifts again as he's given the specific interpretation concerning the fourth beast. That the fourth beast and the 10 horns are linked to one another and yet separate from one another. That they're similar and separate. That this, if you like, you could say that the horns represent this fifth kingdom, which has yet to come into human history. And chapter 2 helps us in understanding this idea that there are different materials all identified with the statue, and there's 5 different sections. And so there's a fourth beast, but this different section in these 10 toes and 10 horns. Now, the little horn, the Antichrist, comes after and from within the fifth nation, taking it over. You could kind of say it like this, that the beasts represent man's rule, the horns and the little horn represents Satan's rule, and then there's God's rule at the end. And you could look at it that way. Now, we're given a specific time frame. Did you see that there? At the end of verse 25, it says, the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. That there's this idea of a time frame. Now, what this is a time is 1 year, times is 2 more years, and half a time is 3.5 years total, which is exactly what we looked at in Revelation chapter 13, verse 5, which says, then the beast was allowed to speak great blasphemies against God, and he was given authority over whatever he wanted for 42 months, 3.5 years, this exact time frame. But notice that something shifts here in verse 26. All of this as the backdrop, all of this going on, but then we have verse 26, but. I think that's the most comforting word. Because as you think on these things, as you read on these things, as you look at all of this and you think back across human history and you think ahead to what could take place and all of the chaos and turmoil of the world, that it's easy to become overwhelmed by it. It's easy for it to just unsettle you. And yet the word but is given there. The court shall be seated and they'll take away his dominion. Satan doesn't get to rule. You see, the picture, as it grows increasingly terrible and bleak, is interrupted by God stepping in. God doesn't let it just go. He has something he's going to do. In verses 23 through 27, we see that Satan removes the authority of man, but then God removes the authority of Satan and sets up his own king, centralizing in his own kingdom in heaven and on his throne. God's rule succeeds where man's rule fails. And his is established in righteousness, in perfection, in equity, in justice. And it can't end. No one can overthrow God or somehow figure a way. I know what we're going to do to gain power and authority. This is just such an amazing thing to see, because what we look at in this is that all of the fairy tales about what we hope would be true are actually realized in Jesus. That the reason that you have this yearning for people to just get along with one another, the reason that you want peace, the reason that you just want there to be this justice and rightness and fairness and equity and goodness, and why can't people just treat one another with decency and respect and love one another? Why are we constantly fighting and battling with one another? Is because so long as we're on this side of eternity, that's the way it's going to be, because man is fallen. And even though I want to try with all that I am to be good, to be right, to do well, I'm going to sin. I'm going to fail. I'm going to sin against you. You're going to sin against me. It's just the way that it's going to go, because we're fallen people. But Jesus is perfect. And so the whole thing where we long for that time when people could be at peace with one another and man could be at peace with God. That's this innate sense within us that we need Jesus to rule. We need his kingdom. We need his authority. And so verse 28, we see that Daniel's mind is swimming with all this. Look at what it says. This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly troubled me and my countenance changed, but I kept this matter in my heart. You see, Daniel's mind is swimming with all this, and it really troubles him, so much so that he's physically changed. The way he carries his face changes. His physical, the way he carries himself changes. And some of it had to do with what he couldn't understand, but a lot of it had to do with what he could understand. That he understood the consequences of man ruling. He understood the gravity of Satan being able to rule and how terrible that would be for people, and that he would have this power over the saints. And it just troubled him. And it is troubling. And as we kind of conclude this chapter together today, I just want to ask you to think about this. That if your focus is only on what you can see right now and what you can understand right now, then you too, like Daniel, will be troubled. If it's only what you understand, if it's only what you can see, if it's only what's right in front of you, if there's no element of God's in control and he can do what we never could think, if there isn't any of that there, if it's only focused here and now, if your head is down and if your eyes are on humanity, you're going to have a troubled heart. You're going to have a difficult time. But there are parts of this that from our perspective seem like God's disconnected and indifferent and that things are spinning out of control. And the truth is, he hasn't left his throne. He's in control. He's in authority. And he's working out things for his glory and his purposes. That our relationship with Jesus is based on faith, which means you trust him with what you know and with what you don't know. Not just what you know. Also with what you don't know and what you couldn't even put together. And the reality of standing before God as judge is a sobering reality. It's a sobering truth. And so the question is your name written in the book of life? Because that's the central theme in Daniel chapter 7. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about visions and beasts and all that kind of stuff, but it always comes back to the fact that God wins. It always comes back to this central thing, this focal point of the book of life. That's what everything hinges on. And then if you're hoping that somehow my good works are going to outweigh my bad works, if somehow I'm going to be able to give enough money and adopt enough dogs from the animal shelter and not kick enough cats, then God's going to like me and he's going to let me in, then your hope is built on something that is crumbling and shallow. That your hope has got to be built on this one thing, the thing that separates whether or not you're in God's presence or not. Revelation chapter 20, is your name written in the book of life? And the only way your name gets written in the book of life is with the ink of the blood of Jesus. That's the only way it gets written in. You can't write it in any other way. You can't bribe your way in. You can't do enough good stuff to get in. You can't talk your way in. You're not going to get before God and just be able to use some smooth words and flattery and somehow figure it out. It's just not going to be the way that it works. Only through Jesus. When your name's written in the book of life with the ink of Jesus' blood, then all the wrong that you should be judged for is paid for you. And instead you get the grace of God. And so I want to encourage you with that thought. Is your name written in the book of life? Have you trusted Jesus with your heart? Have you asked him to forgive your sin? Have you asked him to move in and to be king and Lord and ruler? Because he is king. Whether or not you recognize it is beside the point. He is king. The difference is, will you submit to him now and experience life? Or will you resist him and be forced to submit to him later and not experience that life and instead experience eternal death? I pray that you would choose to submit your heart to Jesus and allow him to be your king. Let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for your word. And we thank you for the chance to study it together. And we pray that you would help us as we think through these things to put our hope firmly in you. That it would provoke us where we need to abandon our sin. That it would encourage us where we need to remember that you are in charge. And that you would overall just help us to seek out your glory and your purpose. We're so thankful for you and how good you are. We pray that your name would be glorified among us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.